When we mention ancient Greek schools, there are two things we could be talking about. We could mean literal schools, like the Academy and the Lyceum, physical places where people would go to take lessons and learn from teachers. Or we could be talking about philosophical schools of thought, or beliefs that were so popular that they formed a community. These two kinds of schools were often linked. Teachers usually had a school of thought that they preferred, and some philosophers even opened schools specifically to talk about their belief systems. But while the successes of early teachers inspired countless others to open schools all across the Mediterranean, there were two philosophical schools of thought that stood out. The beliefs of these schools were very different from the other popular philosophies of ancient Greece, but their core values were actually kind of similar to each other. Unlike most other philosophies, they didn't care about the theoretical right and wrong ways to live, and instead focused on finding practical ways of living that actually benefited people personally. Not to mention, the founders of these schools were both foreigners to Athens, coming from far-off islands in the eastern Mediterranean. And yet, the Epicureans and the Stoics were undying rivals. The ideas of these schools lasted through the Golden Age of Athens, gained popularity during the Roman Empire, and continue to guide modern philosophy even today. The institutions created by Epicurus and Zeno were just two of many in the ancient Mediterranean. Their philosophies, though, were groundbreaking. First, let's set the stage for the rise of these two schools. Like I mentioned in the last video, the ancient kingdom of Macedon had been slowly conquering city-states in the Mediterranean since the beginning of the 4th century BCE. Although many city-states, like Athens, were still technically independent, they were basically controlled by Macedon. The Macedonian party had taken over the Athenian government, dismantling the democracy, taking away citizens' right to vote, and ruling the city with a small group of hand-picked aristocrats. This led to massive changes in daily life, not only because the Athenian government was turned over to completely new rulers, but because the state stopped enforcing religious beliefs. Ancient Greek religion and politics had always been connected, but when the people controlling the government weren't even culturally Greek, what were citizens supposed to believe in? People began searching for meaning in their lives without the help of religion. And in 307 BCE, a man named Epicurus stepped up to provide an answer. Epicurus had been born on the island of Samos around 342 BCE. His parents had probably come from Athens, where his father had been a teacher, but had left due to the unpopularity of the job. Epicurus left Samos when he was young and found jobs working as a philosophy teacher in nearby islands. Eventually, he moved to Athens, where he bought a house, located outside of the main city near Plato's Academy. This house ended up becoming the site for Epicurus' school, giving it the name the Garden. But enough background. What exactly did Epicurus teach that became so important to modern philosophy? Well, simply put, Epicurus believed that the goal of every person's life should be to find peace. Epicurus thought that too many people in ancient Greece were worrying about things beyond their control, and that in doing so, they were ruining their own lives. While other people dedicated their time to trying to understand the gods, Epicurus was convinced that they were wasting their time. Instead, Epicurus taught his students that they had free will and that they could live their lives the way they wanted to. Epicureanism was a practical philosophy that people could follow in their day-to-day lives. A lot of what Epicurus taught his students was based in philosophy and ethics. His students were encouraged to imitate their teachers, who had apparently mastered the techniques taught in the garden and were completely carefree. Epicurus didn't only teach philosophy, though. At the end of the day, the garden was still a school, and it still taught its students real information about the world. The only difference was, when Epicurus taught his students other subjects like physics and astronomy, he did it so that they could better understand his philosophy. Take, for example, astronomy. Epicurus wrote and taught a lot about the stars and the planets, but he wasn't concerned with finding the truth to the universe. Instead, Epicurus taught his students about the natural world so that they could stop worrying about all the things they didn't know. At the same time, Epicurus' scientific discoveries were actually really advanced. Most notable were his theories of atomism, which, if you've ever taken high school chemistry, will sound really familiar. Some of the many things that Epicurus got right about physics included the fact that matter cannot be created nor destroyed, that everything is built out of atoms and the empty space between them, and that the universe is constantly expanding. While to us these seem like really advanced topics, Epicurus saw them as simple ways to make the world less intimidating to his students. At the end of the day, Epicurus wanted to convince his students to stop worrying about all the things they didn't know. He saw education as a way to calm the little voice in your head so that you could instead focus on all the things in your life that bring you joy, like good food and close friends. As you can imagine though, this ignore everything that's bad in your life because you can't control it anyway way of living wasn't necessarily very popular, especially as social problems continue to get more and more demanding. And so, just a few years after the garden was created in Athens, a rival school was opened. Now, if you've ever heard the word Stoic, you should already have a pretty good idea of what this other school was about. The Stoics believed that the world was always changing, and that rather than trying to fight it like most other philosophers or ignore it like the Epicureans, you should instead learn to live with it. Stoics thought that it was important to learn how the world works, not so that they could stop worrying about it, but so that they could live their lives accordingly. The founder of Stoicism, Zeno of Citium, was born on the island of Cyprus in 334 BCE and traveled to Athens as a young man. He spent his first several years in the city learning from all kinds of philosophers, even going to Plato's academy to learn from the head of the school, Xenocrates. Eventually, around 300 BCE, Zeno used all of his philosophical knowledge to develop his own school of thought. He began teaching his philosophy in the center of Athenian society, the Agora. Specifically, Zeno set up shop in the painted Stoa Poikile, a colonnade that was a popular meeting place for philosophers. As a result, Zeno's school became known as the Stoa, making his beliefs Stoic. Unfortunately for us, none of Zeno's written works survive. We do have a few fragments from later biographers and historians, but most of what we know about Zeno's teaching comes from the beliefs of his followers. Luckily for us, Stoicism became super popular. Some of Stoicism's most famous followers included Chrysippus, who helped shape the school into what we know today, the Roman philosopher Seneca, and even a Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius. Stoics are mainly focused on one thing: learning how to live in a world that was completely out of their control. They wanted to make sure that they always did the right thing, even when the right thing was confusing. To explain this, let's use an ancient metaphor. When you put an oar in the water, it seems like it bends. Some people might even assume that the oar is broken and throw it out. Still, we know that the oar isn't actually bent, that it's just an illusion in the water. If you want to actually row the boat, you need to know that the water is going to make the oar look like it's bent instead of giving up entirely. Stoics believed that the key to happiness was accepting that the world works in weird ways and to live morally in spite of it. We don't know what kinds of lessons Zeno originally taught in the Stoa, although later Stoics were interested in subjects like philosophy, logic, grammar, rhetoric, astronomy, and even history. We do know that Zeno thought education was the key to virtue. In one of the few remaining fragments of Zeno's writing, he proposed a society where you had to be well educated to become a citizen. He envisioned his school as a community of intelligent people who could discuss what they knew about the world and together find a way to live virtuously. Ultimately, Zeno and Epicurus would not be remembered for the physical schools they established, the Stoa and the Garden. Their philosophies, though, how they saw the world, their places in it, and the role of education in their lives, are timeless. People turn to Epicureanism and Stoicism to find comfort in the world, to make sense of their lives. The philosophies of Zeno and Epicurus live on, showing people why education is important in their personal lives. Education does not need to be a means to an end, a way to move up in the world. Sometimes, education is just a habit that people practice in order to find happiness.